Hello, everyone. So, as Brooks was saying, I want to take us on a quick journey into a topic that is a very specific example of investing in resilience, but a very important one, which is to restore health to our planet by closing the carbon cycle. So who the heck am I? I am a longtime fan and fellow traveler of Amy's and many of you. It's great to see you here, and thank you, Amy, for bringing us all together for the third time, my first time. What a wonderful place and a wonderful gathering and such an important topic. I'm a longtime investor and entrepreneur in this space, and I focus on picking management teams that have potential game-changing solutions and helping them across capital formation, finding customers and partners, strategy and marketing, and in two major areas. One is more on the electron side and leveraging today's internet technologies to drive progress in how we use resources. And the second is on carbon, which we're going to talk a little bit about now. So, as Brooks was just saying, one sort of useful way of thinking about the way we're abusing our planet is we have this natural carbon cycle. Plants take in CO2 from the air and they make the wonderful world that we have outside out of it. And we, in recent years, have been disgorging that carbon from the crust of the Earth at about a rate of 1 million years of natural sequestration per year. So we all know this, we have a problem. What I think a lot of people don't quite realize, and I go around the world talking about this, and this includes many of the people who are really the most involved in addressing the climate change challenge, is that we've gotten to a point because of the amount of CO2 that we've emitted, and because of the long-lasting nature of CO2, it stays in the atmosphere once you've emitted it for hundreds to thousands of years. So unlike SO2 and other pollutants, you can't just stop and the problem goes away. We solved acid rain because we basically stopped a lot of emissions from power plants, and the lakes and the environment recovered quite quickly. This is not true for CO2. It persists for thousands of years. So because of that, it's not enough to just reduce what we're putting in. We've gotten to the point now where the bathtub is overflowing, and we have to actually remove massive amounts of CO2 from the atmosphere to be able to address or to avoid catastrophic climate change. How much? A lot. 160 gigatons, according to the latest IPCC reports, to the most likely 2-degree scenarios. What does that mean? That means that starting soon, we have to remove from the atmosphere the same amount that the United States is now putting in the atmosphere each year. So, we have this huge economy, we're emitting all the CO2. We not only need to reduce that and or eliminate that, we need to back out on top of that, about that same amount for several decades by the end of the century to avoid catastrophic climate change. Huge, huge challenge. So, how do we do this? There's been a number of different solutions proposed, all the way on this side to some fairly, I consider, risky geoengineering solutions, altering the basic chemistry of the oceans or the clouds. And on the other side, grow trees, right? That's the natural carbon cycle, and it does work. It's just slow, and there's not enough land area, unfortunately, on the planet to do that, to solve the problem, to get that much out. So we're probably somewhere in the middle there with technological solutions combined with biological solutions to try to address this situation. We have to capture a lot of CO2, but what do we do with it if we got all that CO2, right? Do we just shove it underground? Maybe that's part of the solution. There's some risks there, might come back up, but we live on a planet where a lot of the things that we value are made out of CO2 and carbon, right? What if we could close the carbon cycle? What if we could turn CO2 from a waste into an asset? And there are many promising pathways, all the ways from plastics and chemicals and fuels and fertilizers and building materials, animal feeds, food, life, right? All these things are made out of carbon. So can we find ways to mimic nature in an accelerated fashion to have an industrial version of photosynthesis that actually not only addresses the climate challenge, but also creates tremendous economic value and human value. It provides a accelerant, if you will, to human development around the world. So this can add up to a big deal, both on an impact and a profit perspective. If you look at some of the most promising carbon utilization pathways, the impact or the contribution it can make to addressing climate change is significant, and the annual economic potential, according to a recent report from McKinsey, is about $800 billion to $1 trillion a year. Now, we're not there yet, we're very far from that. But in terms of this, the magnitude from an investor perspective of this opportunity, it's very real. But many challenges too facing us getting there. They span from technical challenges, trying to dislodge embedded corporate and incumbent industries, lack of carbon price, perception around this. You know, if we're capturing CO2 and turning something into value, is that giving emitters an excuse to continue emitting? And then the capital issue. So how do you create a new global industry from scratch, essentially? Where do you start? We've gone on a journey to try to get started, and this is a little bit of the spectrum of things that we've tried. I worked with the X Prize Foundation over the last several years to raise about $40 million for something called the Carbon X Prize, which launched in late 2015. You may have heard about it. It's a global competition to accelerate innovation and commercialization in turning CO2 from a waste into an asset. There are now 25 semifinalists from around the world competing for this prize, $20 million prize. We've invested in companies, and this one here, I have to admit, disclaimer, is co-founded by my father, who is a physicist originally from Bell Labs and ran a big R&D lab at Exxon, was the founding director of the Columbia Earth Institute, and is a current professor at Columbia in Earth and Planetary Sciences. He's the out of central casting physicist. He's got hair like this. He looks like Einstein. And never in his life had he invented anything, but he decided to invade my space and try to address the climate challenge. And he came up with a way to capture CO2 from air economically, less than $50 a ton, which most people don't think is counterintuitive. If you're trying to capture CO2 from a flue gas, it's concentrated, should be less expensive than capturing it from the air. But the fact of the matter is that if you can capture CO2 from air, air is everywhere. And it gives you the ability to then turn it into something much more flexibly than having to locate your utilization where there are concentrated sources. And as I mentioned already, we have to solve the air capture problem. So that's an example of a company, and there are others in that space, both in direct air capture and trying to tackle this overall problem. I just get to highlight my fathers. We've put together test centers. Neighboring state, Wyoming, has invested about $25 million in an integrated carbon utilization center, and so has Alberta. And then we have launched most recently what we're calling the Circular Carbon Network with X Prize to really try to pull people together, impact investors, industry leaders, entrepreneurs, to address this challenge. So we've gone through a whole series of stakeholder outreach, including events like this, talked to a whole bunch of the stakeholder ecosystem, a broad variety of different types of stakeholders, broad variety of different investors. And we've really seen that capital is the fundamental cross-cutting issue that we have to start with. And that's really what I wanted to just leave you with here today. Why is capital so important? Well, there's a lot of money that's required, and it's incredibly urgent. We have to get started, and we need fuel to get started. We went and surveyed the Carbon X Prize competitors and asked them how much money they'd raised. Well, 112 million sounds like a lot, but it's not really for 25 companies. And you can see that it's very biased here by one company. And they all said, we need more capital to compete. And as you can see here, not a lot of them were raising money from private investors. Still very, very biased towards academia and government sources. These are some of the challenges that they told us they had across technology, policy, markets, and fundraising generally. And then we went and talked to investors, and we said, what would help you get engaged in this space? And they had a lot of questions. And a lot of them were sort of typical around, what's the potential of this space, what's the time frame, but also who else is involved, right? If I'm trying to start a kindergarten or an education system and I'm only starting a kindergarten, I'm not going to get very far. I'm not going to have an educated populace by just having that seed stage class. There are a lot of investor challenges that we need to tackle. Lack of awareness around this whole issue, as we've just talking about. Lack of belief that it can really get there. A lack of urgency. Why try to save the world when you're so many other choices? Right? But the stakes here are real and really urgent. I think I'm not saying that, we have the choir in this room. You all know this. But I do want to encourage you to get engaged. And one of the ways we're trying to serve this community is by creating this circular carbon network. And to really focus in its first stages on this capital challenge, and to start to create a self-aware community of people who are interested in trying to solve it. They may not have the solutions, they may have just one piece of it, but by bringing together large corporates who are potential buyers and distributors of solutions, early stage investors, growth stage investors, project investors, key stakeholders in space, we think we can move the state of the art more quickly. These are some of the examples of the things that we're going to try to do, trying to get deal flow more transparent to a broader range of people, trying to bring together people in events, trying to publish content that helps people understand the roadmap for how we get this to scale. So I would really encourage you to learn more about this, to get engaged. It's a huge challenge, but it's very urgent. And we do know that networks can change the world. So if you'd like to learn more, I'd love to hear your questions now, and I'll be hanging around and have a chance to talk to you. Thank you very much.